ignition switches. On. RPM switches. Set. TD switches. Normal. Doors and hatches. Closed. Light out. Strobe light. On. Restart check is complete. Clear left. Engineers, start number 2. Starting 2. Wing 31010, Pilot Project Podcast. Clear takeoff. Runway 31 left.
All right, we're ready for departure here at the Pilot Project Podcast, the best source for stories and advice from the pilots of the RCAF. I'm your host, Brian Morrison, and we're sitting down today for part 2 of our chat with the current wing commander of 15 Wing Moose Jaw, Colonel Dan Coutts. Dan, welcome back to the show, and thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Brian.
So we're going to start by talking about Moose Jaw. 15 Wing Moose Jaw plays a vital role in shaping the next generation of RCAF pilots. What are your top priorities as wing commander, and how do you ensure the wing remains at the forefront of pilot training excellence?
The priorities for the wing are 2. First is maximizing the efficacy of force generation. So that's both the efficiency of what we do as a business and the effectiveness, to give that word efficacy. And I hammer that fairly often with my folks and reinforce it. And the second is to prepare for the future of aircrew training. So between those 2 priorities, that does focus the staff, the schools, commandants and their staff, and everybody working on the line on what we need to do. That's also led to a greater focus on measurement of what we're doing and trying to understand the things that are the main constraints to what we do in terms of capacity so that we can maximize the capacity and still deliver super high quality training. That's been an ongoing effort throughout the first year or so of my tenure, and will continue on to the end. What that allows us to do is look further ahead and project with more precision our throughput. And if we can do that better, we can do a better job of loading up those courses so we don't have people waiting between, and then ultimately informing for the CAF what our capacity is when it comes to strategic intake of pilots so that we can shape that for the future. And then, it's not me making those calls, but we can offer that data up to my boss, the commander of 2 Canadian Air Division, General Alexander, who can then have that consultation with the commander of the Air Force and the commander of 1CAT as well and the deputy commander of the Air Force about what we should be looking at for a strategic intake for pilots and how we're going to manage that system, especially as we go through that sensitive transition. That's the short version.
Okay, so a lot of data collection sounds like for essentially making things as efficient as possible, trying to gain those efficiencies. Can you give me an example of some of the data you guys are collecting?
Well, one of the areas we wanted to focus on in Moose Jaw as the aircraft ages is the availability rates of the Harvards, but we also wanted to change how we scheduled. So the current commandant of 2CFFTS, Phil Tricott, has brought into play a more open approach to scheduling where we set the framework based on the capacity we know we have. And then we highlight to the instructors that, the schedule needs to be filled, but they can essentially bid is maybe not the right word, but I don't have a better one for it. They can bid on where they're going to do their particular remits, where they're going to fly their time, knowing that, ultimately it has to be filled. I think that is, more than anything in Moose Jaw, especially for 2CFFTS, changed the landscape and made us a bit more effective. The instructors, I get the sense they have a greater sense of agency over what we're doing and ownership. So it's not just about measuring the performance and trying to hold people to account with that. It's actually the inverse. I'm trying to measure the performance to understand better, and then come up with ways like those good ideas that can come from everybody who's actually doing the business about how we can improve things. We can't identify that we have a challenge until you get to the nitty gritty of it, see what that challenge precisely is. Once you do, then you can have a conversation about it, and you can trust the genius that's in the crowd to come up with those solutions. Because I'm certainly not going to be the smart person that comes up with all the solutions. I just don't have that. I am not an expert on flight instruction in the Harvard, and I have experts that are super experienced in that area. So if I come to them with a problem and say, look, we recognize we have a particular issue here or there, and then we can actually tap into that genius and their creativity.
Right. And I think that almost goes back to what we were talking about in the previous episode about kind of knowing who your people are and what their expertises are and kind of using that to the fullest.
Absolutely. And the role of a wing commander, I see it as setting those conditions, helping to give the folks who are doing the business the resources they need as much as possible, not always perfect. You give them everything you want to give them, but as much as you can. And then coaching and mentoring where you need to, but then also just getting out of the way and letting them do the business once you've set up those parameters. So that's why I focus so heavily on that number one priority, saying it's maximizing the efficacy of our force generation and making sure people understand that. Because once they understand that intent, and then you step back and let them work towards it, they're going to find new and innovative ways to get there. That scheduling is just one of them, but there's been many others as well over the past several years.
For sure. And I feel like we're almost getting into this. So what would you say your current role is in shaping the future of RCAF pilots?
That would be the main one, just to set the conditions and then help to coach and mentor with my immediate subordinates, and then also just where I can get out of the way and help that servant leader mindset of inverting the hierarchical pyramid. And I'm there to help solve the problems that can't be solved by my commandants, and they're there to solve the problems that can't be solved by their majors, and so on. That really helps. And then you're encouraging people to come to you with their problems that they can't solve locally. And if I can't fix it, I go hire and shop it around to try and find the people who actually can help us resolve these particular issues, whether it's trying to procure winter flying boots so that we can keep flying the aircraft safely during the wintertime, while we're waiting for a longer term project to kick in. These are the kinds of things that end up being the wing commander's purview to help find solutions for. And I view that as the main focus for me is trying to help my folks with the problems that they can't solve themselves at their level. Then you still have to lead from the front. You still have to be there and talk to the students and provide a bit of an example of what senior leadership in the Canadian Armed Forces needs to look like, and then have conversations with them about that as well.
So basically, it's a combination of kind of that leading at almost a tactical level, but also, like you said, setting the conditions and then solving the big problems so that they can focus on meeting those conditions.
Yes, and I have to be careful to get out of the way because I've led at the tactical level. I've been a unit commander, but I have unit commanders who are supposed to be doing that as well. So
for sure,
that's another thing that a wing commander has to be careful not to do, is to get in their chili too much.
Yeah, I can imagine that could be a bit of a challenge. It's a fine line to walk, I would think.
Yes.
Did it feel serendipitous to be back at 15 Wing Moose Jaw all those years later?
It's been a really neat experience. The town has changed. It's really improved, at least from my memories. Now, my memories are colored also by the stress of going through pilot training.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying living here. I'm enjoying the people. It's really great to be back. This is one of the few jobs that I asked for and actually got over my career. There was, and I have to give a lot of credit to my mentors and my leaders. They made a plan for me back in 2019, and that pathway has actually worked out, and we've seen it come to fruition. And so, none of us get to be in any of these positions without an entire army of people supporting us. So there's also that aspect that I'm very grateful for as well.
For sure. You mentioned that you asked for that position. What made you want it?
I was on a course with then Colonel O'Reilly. I can't remember what year it was, but it was in the mid-teens, probably 2017 or 2018. And he was the wing commander, and he was describing the job to me. And it just seemed like a really cool job. You get to influence an entire generation of pilots who are coming through training, but then you're also influencing an entire generation of instructors who will go back to a large extent. A lot of them will go back to their communities or other units across the Air Force or other headquarters. And you'll have had a chance to interact with them and hopefully help them at some point with their jobs and their challenges. And that's a pretty neat place to be. I think that's the same for every wing commander, but especially here, the ability to tap into that ab initio pipeline and talk to the students. That's a pretty neat experience. I love sitting down when I go to Portage and talk to the students there, or when I'm here and I go into the mess and say hello to a few folks. I love sitting down with those brand new soon-to-be pilots and talking to them about their experiences and just the excitement they have about this career and being in the Air Force, in spite of the challenge and stress we put them under. It's just so neat to be exposed to that, and refreshing, reinvigorating to be able to talk to people who are just starting out in their careers when I'm coming close to the end of mine. That's a great aspect of this opportunity to be able to lead here.
Yeah. I've always said I thought that one of the coolest CO jobs must be being like the school commandant or being the wing commander. Like you said, there's just so much energy and excitement at 2 and 3 CFFTS. Everybody is just so motivated to be there. They're achieving their dreams. It's just such a high energy, positive space.
And learning how to fly is a lot of fun. At the end of the day, being a pilot, I'm still learning how to fly over and over again when I go fly, and
For sure.
trying to be better. It never stops. But when you first start out, yeah, it's really neat.
And you have to remember that too, right? Because it can be very stressful. It can be overwhelming. You want to perform, especially within the military flight training system. Everyone wants to be the best. Everyone wants to go out there and crush it. And sometimes you have to remind yourself to look around, take a breath, and say, man, this is really cool.
I do talk to each course as they come through phase 2 and try to remind them of that. I ask them, when you joined, how many people actually got accepted to pilot the year you came in? And then compare it to the population of Canada, 39 odd million people. You're in a pretty special spot when you get accepted for pilot training in the Canadian Armed Forces. You're going to get training second to none, and then you're going to have these experiences, and then set up for a career where you're going to have variety. For sure, there's going to be boring days, but then there's also going to be days where weird things happen that you never expected, and you have to rely on your training to carry you through. That's a really invigorating career to have.
And not just that, but you're also flying in aircraft that the average private pilot in Canada would give anything just for a ride in. Like that would make their year to go up into Harvard.
Absolutely.
And that's the platform that you're just conducting your training in every day. I think that's just so cool.
It is really neat. We had the opportunity to fly the Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan several months back, and just to see the grin on his face as he's coming out of the aircraft, it's special. What we do anywhere in the Air Force, but especially in the training system, it is really a privilege to be able to do a lot of the things that we get to do.
Yeah, for sure. So in May 2024, a contract was awarded to Skyline Canada Limited Partnership for the Future Aircrew Training Program, or FACT. In broad strokes, can you outline what will change in pilot training and how it will improve how the RCAF trains its pilots?
For sure. I think the biggest change, or what it'll do to improve the training for the RCF, is really bring us into the 21st century as we look at those new training platforms and marry into the streams that allow us to fly all the advanced aircraft we're getting. The F-35, the Poseidon, the multi-role aircraft, the future vertical lift, whatever that's going to look like. There's so many changes coming to the Air Force, and we need to be able to train on platforms that are more representative of those, capabilities that are coming on really quickly. And I think that's probably the key element to FACT. We're not going to train. It'll have some capacity to train a little bit more, but more importantly, it'll be training with aircraft that will set our students up for success, whether they're going into multi-role aircraft, multi-engine aircraft, fighters, going to instruct later on in other aircraft, or flying helicopters. It's going to set them up for success. The change, it should be a multi-year change. I'm not sure exactly what IOC is going to be. It'll depend on how the contractor, Skyline, brings on the aircraft.
Could you explain what IOC is?
The initial operating capability, when we actually will start to use those aircraft in earnest for training. It's supposed to be around the 2028, 2029 timeframe. We just have to wait to see how that contract shakes out. We're still in early days as the Skyline team comes together and starts to do the agreements for purchasing the aircraft and figuring out how we're going to put in the simulators, design all the buildings that need to come along with this program to support those new capabilities. So I'm not sure exactly when that's going to come online, but it's around that time frame. In terms of what else changes, obviously the aircraft change. On the Moose Jaw side, we'll see, at least the proposal is, we'll see the Grobe turboprop come here. So the Grobes in Portage right now that do primary flight training will be replaced by a turboprop, and then it mixes up the phases and streamlines things a little bit. So you'll start with basic flight training on that, and then move on to advanced flight training on the PC-21. And the Air Force is still working with the contractor to figure out exactly what those training plans look like, but that's the broad strokes concept. Beyond that, folks will be selected off of the basic flight training to go helicopters. Off the advanced flight training partway through, you go across to either the future King Air or selected for instructing in fighters, high performance aircraft, if you will. And then if you're going, again, multi-engine, you go back to Portage La Prairie with 3 CFFTS to fly the multi-engine aircraft there, the King Air. And for the helicopter students, we'll combine the two fleets. It'll no longer be the 206 and the 146 Outlaw. it will be just the HC-135 helicopter that will be used for the entire Phase 3 program for rotary wing training.
So do I understand that from what you just said, now basic flight training is going to be located in Moose Jaw? It'll just be the helicopters and multi-engine here in Portage?
That's the current plan, yes. And then beyond that, there's also the training that happens in Winnipeg. So this is the other big big change for the contract. It's a big contract, $11.2 billion, and they're combining what is currently two separate contracts here with NFTC and in Portage with CFTS, the Canadian Flight Training Program out there. And as well, what's currently being delivered by the military at 402 Squadron in Winnipeg with the AXO and ASOP training, that's all going to be part of FACT. So it's a massive program for the Air Force, a huge investment by the government in the Air Force for training. And it's not just training pilots now, it's also going to involve the training we do in Winnipeg too.
That's right. That's why it's called the Aircrew Training Program, not the future pilot training plan. Like this is for all aircrew.
It is for all aircrew, yes.
That'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what kind of efficiencies we can get from that as well, from kind of combining the efforts all into under one house.
Well, and by working, NFTC has been around since I think we first started using it in earnest around 1999.
A couple acronyms coming your way. NFTC is NATO Flying Training in Canada, and CFFTS is Canadian Forces Flying Training School.
There's been a lot of learning that's happened with that contract over time, and I think across D&D, we've learned how to do those contracts better. When we did the CFTS contract with our partner KF Aero in 3 CFFTS in Southport, a Southport facility near Portage la Prairie, that also has been a really good learning experience. And the team that worked in Ottawa across multiple D&D departments in the Air Force and other elements of the CAF to put together this contract, they learned from all those experiences and pulled it all together. So it sounds like a very promising contract that's going to have flexibility built into it, and I think we're all very excited to see it come to fruition. It's not going to be without its headaches. There's going to be delays. Like when the contractor's talking about the Gantt chart for this and the number of lines and sub projects that they have to execute, it's mind-boggling. Like there is thousands upon thousands of tasks that need to be accomplished and accounted for. So there's going to be challenges, but they put a good team in place to make that all happen.
Yeah, of course. Any new plan, any new contract is going to involve some growing pains and things to work through when it's first implemented, right? That's just par for the course.
Absolutely. The one thing I really appreciate about what's been designed into this is from the very beginning, we're talking about our partners. It is right now, the Canadian Armed Forces, D&D with our public service employees and the contractors. That's how we make NFTC and CFTS happen. But in the future, we're explicitly saying that even as they were signing this contract, this is about having a partner in Skyline that will be working closely with the Air Force and D&D to deliver this effect for Canadians.
Do we know how the fleet replacement will occur yet?
I don't know exactly how it will. The theory, I guess, is we will hopefully ramp up the capability over time. But Skyline is currently still signing the contracts. I'm not sure if the ink's dry on some of them or if they're about to sign other procurement contracts. So that will depend on the delivery timeline for the different manufacturers that are out there for the Grove and the Pilatus and the HC-135 and the King Air. And then the simulators and then the buildings.
Yep.
So that will all tie together. So I can't really say exactly what that will look like, but theoretically you'd want to have a nice handoff between the two or the three different programs, I guess, between Future Aircrew Training, NFTC, and CFTS. You want to have a smooth transition. So there's a lot of staff working in Winnipeg right now to try and plan that out, in addition to building all the new training plans that we're going to need with these new platforms, plan out how we're going to do that transition, and then working closely with the team in Ottawa to make sure that we can stick handle this so that it is as smooth as possible. But also, we want to avoid capturing students in the middle of that transition. So we want to make sure we push as many people through as we can in the interim and minimize that bill in the middle so that somebody is not languishing as we're ramping down one and standing up the next. And we want to see people get in training at the beginning and get through in a timely fashion and get their wings. And so that's one thing they're working really hard on right now to plan that out. Even though we don't have all the information, we don't have perfect information about how it will work. They're really working hard to try and maximize the efficiency of that program. So when we hand the students through that program, that nobody gets lost.
Okay, that makes sense. And my next question was going to be if there would be a cessation of training during this transition, but it sounds like you guys are hoping to avoid that.
Yeah, hoping to avoid that. I'm not, again, until we know all more details about how this unfolds, hard to say exactly how that's going to work.
For sure.
But we're also building the structures right now, both here at 15 Wing and then with the project writ large. They're building the structures that'll help facilitate that in terms of just having the right staff, the right people, the right places to make sure, because we can't plan it all out perfectly ahead of time, to constantly be in contact and discussions about how we're going to fix these little problems as they pop up.
Right on. So speaking of changes in pilot training, listeners probably have seen some articles recently that we retired our CT-155 Hawk trainer jet, which previously conducted all jet training leading up to the CF-18 Hornet. How are we filling this need currently, and what kind of solutions are on the horizon for this capability gap?
For sure. When I mentioned the benefits of FACT, I talked about the ability to train in a way that's going to set our students up for success on the fifth generation aircraft. Quite frankly, doesn't matter if you're flying the P-8 or the F-35. We're working in that same environment that's fully interconnected and much more complex and data enabled than what we've seen in the past. So with that, the Hawk, over time, it was a good platform for what it was. But it wasn't able to help, even with the, if you look at the Hornet extension program, it doesn't necessarily give what you need over time as the Hornet has evolved, what the students need to jump straight into the Hornet. So that, initially when you had it, they're pretty close in training capability. But as you've upgraded the Hornet over time, just as an example, the gap between what you learn on the Hawk and what you need to have to fly one of the most advanced fourth gen fighters that's out there has grown. So that's one of the reasons. The other one is the lifespan on it is getting the avionics. We're not able to replicate what you can do in a modern fighter aircraft, and there's other challenges as well. So they've been retired from flying, but we're still using them. They're being moved to Borden for CIFS-8 to allow it to be used as a more modern trainer for the technicians, because you still have things like the mission computers, the HUDs-up displays, things that don't exist on the tutor training examples that they have right now. These are advanced systems and airframe structures that now are better able to train our new technicians as they enter the forces. So while it's retired from flying, we're still using it in the RCAF going forward, and it'll be a significant part of our training, I think, for our technicians for many years to come. I can't speak to future fighter and fighter lead-in trainer. Sorry, there's a future fighter lead-in trainer group in Ottawa who are designing that solution, and so I frankly don't know what that will look like. I know there's several options out there, but that'll be another massive program, and that's that group who will have to propose to the Command of the Air Force and Treasury Board and the MND what that looks like. In the meantime, we're still using the Eurojoint training program down in Shepherd Air Force Base in the States, where we have several instructors and students training down there, both primarily on the T-38 for the lead-in training, but also a few on the T-6 and more on the T-6 going forward. We have people going through training there. That'll be one feeder, and then we're also looking at Italy. So with the I think it's called the IFTS, the International Flight Training School in Italy. We do have one instructor there right now, and I think another one under training. Then we'll be starting to send students there as well. So that'll be the other bridge flit element we use to get folks from something like a T6 to the Hornet as we upgrade the Hornet and use that for the transition to the F-35.
Okay, so essentially we've got interim solutions and we're working on a permanent solution.
Absolutely.
So your educational background is impressive with several master's degrees and a doctorate. How do you feel this educational background helps you to lead young pilots in the RCAF? And do you think further education should be a priority for pilots?
I'll address the latter half of the question first. I think it depends. When I first became a major, I asked one of my mentors, how they organize their time, how they are so effective at what they do. And he turned me on to the 7 Habits by Stephen Covey. And one thing that really resonated with me with the Stephen Covey framework was the need to sharpen the saw and always invest in yourself. So Education is one way of doing that. I think there are multiple ways of doing that. What's incumbent upon us as professionals, whether you're in the military or in a professional pilot in the aerospace industry writ large, we always need to be improving our skills one way or another. Some of that can be through other education because you build that toolbox. And for me, that's what it has been. I have a fabulous toolbox that I can rely on to help me with my leadership challenges. But there are other toolboxes out there. There's other things you can build. So it also has to be something you're passionate about. So I'd commend anybody, if you're interested in education, to go that route. But there's other things that you can be interested in that can help you out equally as well in becoming, really good in your profession, especially as a military professional, as a pilot. There's other things you can learn about that can really help you in those endeavors. And it's really about, sharpening the saw and building out that toolbox. And that applies to leadership just as much as learning how to fly and be an expert at what you do. So when it comes to my recommendation, do we need higher education for all pilots? I don't think we need to make that any more than it already is. There is benefit to higher level education when it comes to critical thinking, the ability to resolve problems, and a benefit as well when you have diverse programs and people learn diverse things, of having that diversity of mind. We get to complex problems in the Air Force that we need to solve, and we work best when we have people with multiple perspectives. So that's both lived experiences and diversity of mind and the things we've learned during our careers, and bringing those together. That's where the payoff really is. So encourage people to go out and seek those things they're really interested in, passionate about, learn about those things, become experts in, not only in what we do as warfighters, but also in other areas, and bring that back to the organization and help strengthen the team with that diversity.
That makes sense. And you're talking about bringing it back. I imagine part of the drive to gain that education was something you hoped you'd be able to pass on within the CAF?
Yeah, I think when I first started out on my journey with my first master's, it was a bit of that. I learned about things and I immediately saw how I could apply them, even at the tactical level when I was a captain, to my units that I was serving in at the time, and had conversations with other people about those different practices, balanced scorecard and different forms of financial management and different ways of scoring and planning. Those were useful things. It was also, to set myself up for other things if I wanted to take a different course in my life. I'm not going to dismiss that as well. I think we all face those choices. Ultimately, as I got further along in my education, and especially with my doctorate, the doctorate for me really was a passionate focus on something I was interested in, but professionally relevant to me, to understand how to help people do change better in the workplace, and especially in the military settings and the defense settings that we have, understanding how to do that better as well. So, for me, it was when I got to the highest end of my education, it definitely intersected with my military career and trying to do a better job as a leader, and build up my tool set, because I didn't feel I had that tool set to really dig into culture change and help people do that. So I needed to study that more and ultimately build some more tools that I could use.
Speaking of culture change, your doctorate, as we mentioned, is in workplace culture change. A lot of people get their hackles up when they hear the words culture change. In your opinion, why is it something the RCAF needs to embrace?
I think everybody needs to embrace it because we're constantly evolving. So if I can offer 3 ways to look at culture, and the one that probably gets people's hackles up the most is when you think about culture as sort of that iceberg image of, it's my psychology and my personality. And if I say your culture needs to change, the implication is you need to change because you're insufficient or not good. And I think that's why people get their hackles up. I think we can get around that with good dialogue about, our need to always improve the context of our working environments, and our geopolitical context changes. So we need to change with it and adapt. And culture is part of that, alongside things like structure, policy, and process, education, and training. Culture is one of those pillars you need to focus on if you're actually going to have successful change. So I think we can address that particular resistance you sometimes see. But the culture can also be about how we communicate. There's a lot of, from an academic perspective, a lot of studies out there and research that highlights culture is also in how we communicate. So that's a different lens. And then the third lens I'd offer, culture is something performative. Culture is what we do. So with those 3 different viewpoints on culture, we need to actually change sometimes our schemas and our psychology or how we think about the world to a certain extent, or even just expose ourselves, for example, to other people's lived experience. But then we also have to change how we communicate to a certain extent. So we're using language that's up to date with what we want to see in our workplaces and what we want professionalism to look like. And then ultimately what we do. There's a performative aspect. Culture is all those things, both seen and unseen, and then the artifacts we have surrounding what we think and feel, what we communicate, and what we do. There's those artifacts we visibly have out there that represent those things and enact those things in the workplace. So that's where I think people get their hackles up. And I think it's imperative as professionals that we embrace change. And culture is just one of those aspects of change. So if you're a professional and you're going to senior positions in any industry, I think you're going to have to be an expert, not an expert. You'll have to be a good, solid practitioner when it comes to understanding some of the things about culture change. And then you're going to have to understand things about structural change, how to implement education and training, how to change policy and process, because you can't do a good change without doing a good job in each one of those 4 pillars.
Okay. I think sometimes you hear people talking about how all this focus on culture change is making the military soft. What would you say to that?
I think it's a change. I don't think it's making the military soft. We still have that warrior mindset and warfighting focus. When we look at building cohesion as an example, there is certainly the ability to build cohesion rapidly through strict uniformity and compliance to a certain image. And that's been used in militaries for centuries. And there's no denying that is one way. But then you look to conflict and some of the academic research on frontline units. We can also have cohesion and success through a focus on mission accomplishment and that ruthless pursuit of excellence at mission accomplishment. And you don't need to have the same kind of haircut to do that. You don't need to be clean shaven to do that. When you look at the elite units in different wars, quite often when they got to the front lines of those conflicts, some of that barrack block discipline was let go by the wayside because the focus became on mission accomplishment. That was the paramount thing. And I think if we embrace warfighting as a focus on that excellence and on pursuit of mission accomplishment, I think you can still build that cohesion and you can still build that discipline that's required, because the discipline is not about tucking in my boots the right way or my shirt. The discipline is about getting that mission done, being a professional, learning how to do it right, and adapting, even in the face of potential failure and the challenges that come along with any operation. Adapting and overcoming and always finding a way. That's where that mission focus needs to be. So that would be my pushback to people who say we weaken the force just because we allow people to dye their hair and maybe have different grooming standards. I don't think that mission focus has gone away. If anything, with the current strategic environment, people are focusing more, and they're the younger generations of people joining the Air Force today, they're committed, just as committed as every other generation ever has been.
I'll buy that. I think as long as basically somebody is there to do the business, to get the job done and accomplish the mission, that's really what matters.
Absolutely. And we have a professional force that's capable of doing it, properly trained and equipped to execute.
So you've mentioned maintaining your own flying skills with a requalification on the Bell 412 Outlaw and even purchasing a Piper PA-22 Tri-Pacer. How does staying actively involved in flying improve your ability to lead and connect with the trainees at 15 Wing?
So flying the helicopter, it allows me to go out and actually, especially at Portage, because the 3CF FTS unit is in a location that's about 5 hours away from us, right? So 5.5 hours is a bit of distance. It forces me to get out there and fly with them and meet with the commandant and the team, and then fly with the instructors. But I also get to sit down with the students, have meals with them, see what their experience going through pilot training, the different phases is like, and have that opportunity to understand what it's like for them going through it, which informs what I talk about with the commandants, but also gives me an appreciation for what they're going through. Because sometimes we forget, right? Like for me, learning how to fly was a long time ago, and now it doesn't seem as dramatic, but at the time it was hard. And the other thing it does for me as I look at flying, it reminds me that it actually is a ton of work, and sometimes that's easy to lose sight of once you get out of the cockpit for several years. You forget that it does take a ton of work. It's still stressful.
For sure.
It takes a ton of discipline to do it well. And I don't care what platform you're flying. that is the same for all of them. And so for me, that's also been the really informative aspect of keeping the category up. I am by no means super proficient. I barely am able to maintain currency at times, but it gives me an appreciation for the work that our folks are doing. And I'm not even instructing. I'm just trying to fly the helicopter. And then you add the layer of trying to be a really good instructor on top of that, and deliver that professional effect for the Air Force, and train students so that they can go out there when the balloon goes up and do pretty intense things for a country. Like that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of talent to do that well, and it helps me not lose sight of that.
You've mentioned there that flying is a lot of work. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of work. And like you said, you're in a totally different mind space when you're a student. Like I look back and think about like, how did I feel about flying back then? I felt like flying was the end all be all, more important than life and death almost. Like failing just felt like it would be the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. It's just so important when you're in that world.
One thing I'm probably one of the few people who will say it to the news phase twos, but I also remind them that, this is a great way to become a great pilot, but to become a good human being, that's on them. This isn't about that. We're going to train them to great, in the Air Force, we're going to train to be great pilots first in the pilot training system, great officers beyond that. And then beyond that, they still have, there's different pathways to become a great human being. Not all of them lie in the Air Force, right?
Yeah, of course.
Certainly any of your listeners who are working in the civilian industry flying, there's a lot of great professionals out there. And we have that history going back over 100 years in Canada, where the Air Force was seen initially as the flying bush pilots in uniform.
Yep.
We have that proud history in Canada. That is also super cool to be a part of, whether you're in uniform or not. Like we have a really strong history of aerospace developments and flying in Canada, and it's going to be part of our country just because of how we're built and where we are going forward. And that's something that anybody who's in the aviation industry, doesn't matter if you're working in a tower or you're a mechanic working on a helicopter somewhere in the bush, or working at Air Canada in a hangar in Winnipeg or Vancouver. Like you're part of that wider family, and that's a pretty neat place to be.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What do you feel is the biggest upcoming challenge the RCAF will face in training its pilots?
I think the transition to FACT. That's why I have it for the ab initio pilot training system as the number 2 priority. And that's why I'm putting resources to it right now to support everything that my boss and his headquarters is doing for that transition, to make sure that we're giving them the information and looking as far ahead down the road of that implementation to address concerns and build decision space early. So I think it will be that for the ab initio flight training system. For the wider Air Force, that's the commander of the Air Force's space to speak to. But certainly, this is one of the biggest investments that Canada has made in its military since World War II. That is a huge challenge. Doesn't matter what organization you're in, and that's a whole of D&D and CAF challenge, right? There's going to be a lot of changes that need to happen, and you see it coming out of our new Chief of Defense Staff. Her desire to grow the force and do it rapidly and get to us where we need to be by 2029. That's going to take a lot of hard work from everybody. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on our leaders to get that right. And, it's going to be a very interesting time for our new pilots who are joining the Air Force, who want to join the Air Force. It is also going to be, a hard road, but an amazing time. When you actually, like for me, going through that change at 427 when we switched over to be part of CANSOFCOM, it is a pretty amazing place to be in when you get to be part of writing on a blank page, creating something new. And if you're joining the Air Force now, you're going to be a part of that, building this new Air Force and what that's going to look like for the rest of the 21st century. So it's a great time to be starting in your career in the Air Force. I'm pretty envious, actually, of the people who are joining today.
Honestly, I feel the same way. It's an old cliche, right? It's an exciting time to be in the Air Force, but it is a super exciting time to be in the Air Force right now. And especially as people who are just joining, because they're going to be in their career long enough to see all this stuff come to fruition. And they're going to see this Air Force become like super modern and agile. And I think that's going to be really, really cool to see.
It is. Not without its challenges for sure, but it's, that's where we cut our teeth, is in overcoming those challenges and delivering the facts we need to deliver.
For sure. As wing commander, what lasting impact do you hope to achieve at 15 Wing Moose Jaw, and what legacy would you like to leave for future generations of aviators?
I I don't think about my legacy too much. No, I want to leave it I'll leave it a little bit better than I found it. I think we're on the pathway to do that. For wing commanders, much of what we do, I think it'd be the same for any wing commander if you were to interview any of them. Same thing with formation commanders across the CAF. What we're doing usually affects things, that last beyond our tenure. And what we're doing when we're coming into command is picking up somebody else's plan and helping to bring that to fruition. So it's a shared responsibility over time. So that can be, a bit of a challenge because we want to see successes in our time. At the same time, it's also nice to think that you're part of something bigger over time. Like this is a whole of Air Force effort. And you look at the scope of the future of aircrew training, like you realize it is a whole of Air Force and CAF and D&D effort. Like it is, you can't say it's just one person championing that. And to be part of that thing, to be in service to something bigger than yourself, I think that's the coolest part of the service, especially later on in your career in the military. I would hope leaving here that we've also, adjusted the climate to a certain extent, especially when we're looking at servant leadership and that approach of trying to empower people to lead change, what change they can locally, and give them some resources and freedom to do that. I think that makes everybody's life better, and we get a better set of solutions at the end of the day. It can be hard, to step back and let things take a natural course sometimes. But if you give people the right mission statement and the right intent, a lot of the time they're not going to let you down. And so you just have to get out of the way and let them do it. So I'm hoping that we'll see a bit more of a shift in that direction as well. I mean, that's been building, again, that's not starting with me. That's been building over time over successive wing commanders, just something that I'm continuing. And I'm hoping that we'll leave that a bit better by the time I leave too.
I think, like you said, a huge part of leadership is trust, right? It's trusting and getting out of the way and letting your people do what they need to do. You've said something a couple times now that I really like. It's the concept of servant leadership. Can you explain that a little bit?
I guess the simplest version, and again, I'm probably misusing the term in the strictest academic sense, but if you take the hierarchy and you invert it, so my job is not here to tell people what to do and direct them. My job is to support them. For my commandants specifically and the staff who work directly for me, my job is to support them. And when they come to something that they can't solve themselves with the resources or competencies or capabilities they have, then I'm supposed to take that on and take that to a different level and shop around and find the solutions for that. And I go to my boss with the same things when there are things that I cannot solve. My expectation of my higher headquarters at multiple levels is, I'm bringing that to you as something, this is a team sport. This is what we need to resolve to be better at delivering, in this case, the efficacy of training, the generation of air power at the end of the day. And that's important to all of us. So, please help me with this problem. That's the steward leadership mentality, as well as it goes to the core values of the CAF. One of our values is stewardship. And we need to be good stewards of the institution and of the units, the formations that we're entrusted with. And part of that is also coaching, mentoring, trying to help our subordinates as they grow in their roles and their ranks. And I'm not going to claim to be perfect at that, but make it a good effort at it. So for me, that's what servant leadership means is inverting that pyramid and being there to support our folks and try to, very rarely do I have to direct things. More often than not, we're having conversations and trying to gently guide, coach, mentor, and help solve problems that can't be solved at lower levels.
Right on. I like that. So we're going to move on to some questions from listeners.
Okay.
The first question we have is, has the training backlog improved? And if so, is it sufficient to allow VOT, which is voluntary occupational transfer, or commissioning plans into pilot again?
So the VOT is always, I believe, has always been there. I don't think we closed that. The numbers have decreased in recent years, but that's still open. And other commissioning plans, we always have ROTP and DEO, and I don't see that changing. I don't get to, I get to participate in some of the conversations about what it's going to look like, but ultimately that goes to my boss and then beyond that, the commander of the Air Force to decide in consultation with the Chief of Military Personnel what the strategic intake plan looks like. What we really want to do is we want to keep the doors open. At the same time, as we have that transition to fact, we don't want anybody, or we want as few people as possible to be stuck in the middle. And what I'd hate to see is for people to be languishing, in training or at the beginning of their training. So we have made a concerted effort to shrink those timelines. And when I talked earlier about measurement and having more precision in our predictions, that's largely a part of what that's about, is trying to also minimize those wait times between, which we would target to get as low as even 3 months. I think right now we're probably on average sitting somewhere between 6 and 9 months, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. But ultimately, my boss would like to see us get down to 3 months. So I can't speak specifically to year over year what the intake will look like. It will vary depending on that transition to future Verica training, and it'll vary because we don't want to hire somebody on and then just have them sit there and wait. That said, the Air Force is taking a lot of strides in changing or addressing how we're going to position people during their training and making sure that it's value added. So there's efforts ongoing at, again, higher headquarters, not necessarily my partnership, but I know there's work out there to make sure that if there is spent time waiting, we want to make it as relevant as possible.
Okay, so basically we're working on minimizing it, but at the same time also trying to make sure there's maximum value of that time while you're waiting.
Absolutely.
So this is a question we've answered before, but I get asked it so often that I'm going to ask you again.
Okay.
If someone is in their early 30s, do you think it's too late to try to be an RCAF pilot?
Absolutely not. As the pilot occupational advisor, I get to see some of the files that come in and the exemptions that are asked for different things. Somebody else does the work in the PLARs and looking at skills levels to see if they could bypass phases and things.
A PLAR is prior learning assessment and recognition.
We've seen people much older than 30 apply, and they still make great pilots. The age for flying, in the airline industry as well, is going up. We can employ people for a lot longer. People are staying healthier for longer. As long as you're committed and want to serve, I think we should be considering that for sure. So 30 is definitely not too old.
Yeah, totally agree. And honestly, they said early 30s. I think that stands for late 30s. You can start in this career a lot later than you might think.
Absolutely.
I have a few questions from a student who is starting phase 2 this December, and they mentioned they're super excited about that.
Great.
The first question, and first, this might require a little explanation between attached posting and posting. So recently, the posting to phase 2 was changed to an attached posting. Can you, in broad strokes, explain what that means and explain why it happened?
Sure. A posting is a formal movement from one unit to another that involves a transfer of command and control authority over that person in a military sense, so that there's a full command over that person and their career. So full, I guess, if you will, ownership. Attached posting is more like a loan. Somebody goes in a similar sense for a longer period of time to another location, but they're not entitled to the same benefits and like the full move. And they don't necessarily have the receiving unit doesn't have necessarily the full control over that individual or where they're going. Next, as an example. So attached postings are also usually applied when you're going to be somewhere for a shorter period of time, less than a year. I'm not sure exactly what the figure is in the DOADs, but it's for a shorter period of time. A posting generally lasts years when you're in a location. So as we tighten up, and again, I don't think this change has actually happened yet. I think it's actually still being considered. So it's not formalized or finalized. So I don't know exactly what the final solution is going to look at and whether there'll be a hybrid or everybody would be attached posted or not. So I guess I have to offer that caveat as well. I don't think it's actually a done deal yet. But I know the intention behind it. And again, this rests more with my higher headquarters, but it affects us in Moose Jaw. As we've tightened up those timelines, and we're trying to get people through, I'd like to see people graduate with their wings no later than sort of 3 years after their commissioning, if I could have my druthers.
Mm-hmm.
If we tighten up that timeline, you won't be actually in one location that long to merit a full posting. And then as well as you're waiting between phases, we should be helping you wait on an RCAF wing in a place where you're going to see benefit, where you can be exposed through your on-the-job training to a future capability of platform, whether or not you end up there out of your pilot training. At least you've been exposed to operations in the Air Force somewhere else. Sitting in Moose Jaw between phases isn't necessarily going to give you that same exposure. So I think there's those two aspects to it, making it shorter. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably going to be a better experience for pilots when they're between phases for training.
Okay. How does training for Phase 2 differ from the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program, or NJEP, in Texas?
I haven't actually been down to NJET myself, and I haven't flown it myself, so I'm not entirely sure their training plan, what it looks like in comparison to ours in detail. But generically, for the most part, we're getting the same competencies and skills out of it. I'm given to understand that some of their scoring is slightly different from ours, how they actually track their averages and score their pilots overall on their courses. The metrics they use is slightly different, but complementary to what we do. So I'm not convinced there's actually a substantial difference between. Certainly procedurally, there will be some changes. You're flying in American airspace, there's going to be differences there.
For sure.
But, you think about instrument flying, we're all beholden to the ICAO standards.
For the listeners, ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization.
And nations could do something slightly differently, but fundamentally, the instrument flying is very similar around any nation that conforms to ICAO standards. So I don't think there's actually that much of a difference. I think they produce a very high quality product, and we're lucky to be part of that program. We've been part of that program as well, I think I'd have to go check my notes, but I think it's since the 1980s. Like, we've been there for a while.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one way or another.
I didn't realize that. I thought that was fairly new within the last 10, 15 years. So that's pretty cool.
No, it's been longer than that for sure.
Their final question for you was, what is the best restaurant, cafe, pub in town?
So I couldn't pick one.
How about a couple favorites?
Yeah, well, that's the thing that's impressed me about Moose Jaw as I moved back here. When I was going through training, and it might have been also because I was a poor student at the time with, small family and a young family, and making what a second lieutenant makes. Probably didn't get out in town to the restaurants all that much. But there's multiple restaurants. If you like Chinese food, there's Irish pubs, there's Thai food, there's a couple different sushi places. So my spouse and I are going around to all these different places, and it's worth exploring. So I'm not going to say that I have a particular favorite, but there's lots of good restaurants around town. And I'm looking forward to going to Veroba's. I've never been there. I heard it's good, so I'm going to try that next. I want to go back to the Irish pub in town, downtown, and but they're all good.
Is that Bobby's?
I think it was Bobby's. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember they did trivia.
I want to try that out again. Yeah, it depends on what you like. I think there's a place down at the corner of the bottom end of Main Street that does trivia once a week. There's a pub there that does that. And then there's Mary Brown's, which is more like every other Mary Brown's that you'd find across the country. So there's some staples there.
Mary Brown's or Brown's Social House?
Sorry, Brown's Social House. My apologies. Mary Brown's is a chicken place, isn't it? I don't think we have one of those. But there's multiple pizza places in town too. There's local pizza places and there's chains, so there's a variety there. It's if I could say one thing for the folks who are coming to Moose Jaw, whether you're coming as a student or as an instructor, I think it's a better place to be. It always was a good place to be, but it's a good place to be now. It's a small town, easy to live. If you're living here as an instructor or staff, your family can afford to buy a house and have kids and activities, and you'll have the time. You only have to drive across town. You can get across in 10 minutes from a karate lesson to a hockey game or another music lesson or something across town for your kids. So it's a great place to be, and you're not too far from Regina. It can be a bit of a challenge to travel airwise out at Regina, but you can make it happen. So it's a good place to live. It's to start out a career, nobody should be turning their nose up at it. That's for sure.
It sounds like it's come a long way. Like I agree with you. It was a fine place when I was there as a student, but my focuses were not really on exploring the area. But it sounds like, especially in terms of like restaurants and services and stuff, it's really blown up.
I think, blown up might be overstating it, but I remember walking downtown as a student and seeing a lot more empty storefronts, and I don't see the same thing anymore. There's the city has made a lot of gains and has put a lot of effort into revitalizing their downtown core and making it a good place to live and work for families, and it shows. It's really they've really done a good job in the last couple of decades.
That's great to hear. Our next question was about skipping phase 1. So some people have been able to skip phase 1 and move straight to phase 2. Have you seen these students struggle at all as a result of this? And if so, what areas of phase 2 present a particular challenge?
So there's two different contexts. One would be people who have previous experience, and then you do what's called a PLAR, so a previous learning assessment. And if the staff at 2 Canadian Air Division determine that you've met what we have in our training plans and qualification standards for that given course, then sometimes we can advance people beyond that. And in that case, I don't think people would struggle too much. We have run only one trial where we went direct to phase 2. I'm not aware of any other cases where you've gone direct to phase 2. And that trial is still ongoing. The folks are still in course, so I wouldn't comment on the results of that yet.
That's fair.
You can expect that there would be things that people would find challenging for sure, because you've never flown an aircraft before, you never talked on a radio, you've never taxied an aircraft. So there's going to be a really steep learning curve if you do that. But it also highlights for us, I think at the end of the day, we're going to learn what we truly get of value out of that phase 1 program. And it's going to help inform what we do going forward for future aircrew training as well. So I think it's been a worthwhile effort. But for those folks, yeah, certainly they're going to be, they have been and will be working hard as they come into phase 2. But when I give them to understand, for the most part, they're succeeding and no different in the rates compared to any other course. But we'll wait to see how that trial finally finalizes and what we can learn from it.
For sure. I can speak a little bit to skipping phase 1 since I did that coming in with a commercial multi-IFR license. And just personally, I found the biggest struggle was aerobatics.
Okay.
I found I was ahead in IF. I found aerobatics were something that everyone else had done and I hadn't. So I found that challenging. You catch up within a flight or two. But at first I was kind of frustrated because I was like, everything else was coming fairly easy. And then I got hit with this thing I'd never done. So it was a bit humbling. But overall, it's a challenge, but you get through it.
Yeah, it's interesting to point that out and highlights that at each one of those phases, there are some core competencies that get drilled into us that we carry forward with us once we get our wings.
For sure. So our next question is, technology is constantly evolving and the United States Air Force is beginning to use virtual reality to train their pilots. Will Canada follow in their footsteps? And if so, when?
So I think it's important to note we have been using simulation for a long time. Like even when you had the tutor, it just wasn't advanced as what we have now. We have full motion simulators as an example in Portage for the King Air and other task trainers for the 206 and the Globe. We've been using virtual reality in the form of simulation for a long time. For the future of it, I think we've trialed a few things in Portage over the past couple of years. There's virtual reality goggles doing 360 videos for initial maneuvers, like the first time that you see an auto rotation or a circuit or a landing in the King Air. Having that level 5 demonstration from a highly skilled instructor in the VR goggles that's standardized for everybody to see, I think there's a lot of benefit to that. Beyond that, if you want to have practice in VR, whether that's mixed reality or full virtual reality, you really need to have, and this is what we're learning, you really need to have good models of that aircraft so that everything you're doing is representing what the real aircraft would do. So as you become more advanced in maneuvers, you need that constant feedback from the model that's presented that replicates what the aircraft is going to do. Otherwise, you won't necessarily be, you're almost as good just going and chair flying it and using your imagination to remember how that aircraft actually reacts to what you're doing. So I think that's one thing we have to be careful about when we're looking at the future of VR. If we want to use it for more higher end complex maneuvers, you're going to have really good models to make that work. Maybe someday somebody can introduce AI into that. I know USAF is looking at some eye tracking. We've done some of that as well. CAE's done that with DRDC and one of the experiments they've looked at. There may be some use for that, but I think you're still probably several years, or I suspect you're probably still several years away before we have algorithms that can recognize what good looks like and then provide that coaching feedback to a student the same way that we now do with an instructor sitting beside you or sitting behind you in the same aircraft, who can see what you're doing and diagnose and give you feedback on the high-end things that we do. So yeah, I think there's a future for VR. It's not going to be as instantaneous as maybe some people the hype might lead to, but it's going to take an investment. If you want to use it properly, beyond those more simple examples I provided, it'll take investment to make sure those models are really high fidelity so that you get that feedback you need as a pilot to improve.
So probably it has its place, but it has its limitations as well.
Currently has its limitations. Yeah. I think it will continue to evolve and improve for sure.
Okay. What is your career end goal, and what are your hopes for the future of your career?
Career end goal. It's more the end of the career picking me. It's been an adventure. That's one of the nice things about an Air Force career and a career in the CAF is you don't necessarily know what's going to take you. And so that variety is pretty cool. I'm hoping to go back towards Winnipeg if that works out, but I don't know for sure. And I've had enough experience in the Air Force to know that no matter where I end up, it's going to be interesting and rewarding. So we'll see where it goes. I am getting on towards the end of my career though, so it is weird to be in the latter part of your career. Maybe the latter third, depending on how long you stick around. But it's definitely a strange place to be. More runway behind you than there is ahead. But one of the things that's invigorating, again, with this job, that's so cool, is I get to talk to people at the start of their career and get to enjoy a bit of that energy as well. Yeah. So I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up. Or what's going to happen with the rest of my career, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be fun.
Awesome.
We mentioned having my own little plane. That's my happy place as well. So as I'm getting to that stage in life where I can, have some things that I focus on for fun, I still really enjoy flying, and even just the basics of flying. It is, being a pilot inside the military, outside the pilot. I think it's always going to be part of my life, as long as I remain healthy enough to do it. I enjoy it. I still like getting up in a very simple aircraft and just taking off and landing and doing some basic maneuvers. It's still fun even now.
That's great. I love to hear that. So we're going to ask you our final 3 questions that we ask every guest. You've had many demanding positions in the RCAF. How do you stay ready to do your job?
So definitely a focus on self, and I haven't always been good at that. Focusing on, sharpen the saw I've been good at, but taking care of my own self, haven't always been that great, but I try to improve that lately, both physically and mentally. I think that's important for your readiness. And you always have to also find some ways to continually improve, but I try not to push as hard on that as maybe I have earlier in my career. I think that's how you assure readiness and resilience. And then also understanding that it's a team sport, and try not to take it on all yourself. That's something that's come to me with age, is being willing to actually ask for a bit of help from other people, being confident enough in my own abilities to know that it's okay to still ask for help from other people.
Okay. You've seen many pilots come and go through Moose Jaw and beyond. What skills do you think make an effective pilot?
I think we always have to go back to the fundamentals. And you asked me earlier about that one lesson that I learned. I think it comes back to that as well. We need to be disciplined as aviation professionals in the basics. We need to still, years later, I'm still practicing those, trying to improve those. You need to be really good at the basics. And then when you get onto your fleet, you need to become and maintain excellence in being good at fighting that platform and that crew and that formation, depending on what your context is. That's the key to being effective in this business is continuing to push and get really good at those basics. The basics are going to shift over time, right? We're going to have to include more competencies tied to cyber and space power. And so we're going to have to start getting better at that too. And then getting those basics down so that they become a habit. And then we can actually, when it comes time to do things in anger or in an emergency, those things are second nature. And so you can focus on the job at hand, the challenge at hand when you get there, rather than the basics. Yeah. So it always comes back to making sure our pilots are first and foremost good pilots in their fundamentals.
I think it's interesting what you said about the basics changing over time. I think that's completely true, especially with the new aircraft that are coming online as they get more advanced. Like what we consider to be the basics, I think what they consider to be the basics are going to be a little more advanced than kind of what we are thinking about when we say focus on the basics.
Yeah, for sure. There's going to be systems management is a whole new area of competencies that it's always been there to a certain extent, but I think will take more and more focus as we get into more and more complicated aircraft that can, help us do operations better. But the way we fly those aircraft will change for sure.
What advice would you offer to young Canadians aspiring to join the RCAF and embark on a career in aviation?
certainly go out and try to fly first, see if you actually like it. It is not for everybody. A lot of interestingly, and not a lot of the people who do wash out of pilot training, a lot of it comes back to physiological, just gets airsick. Other ones, they get there and you realize, and it's perfectly okay. I'd rather people find out early. They realize maybe it's not for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Go out and try it on for size first and see if you really like it. Because, one of the things I say to the students as well, each new course that comes through, it doesn't get any easier. It actually gets harder as we continue going on. You just get better at it.
Yep.
So you get better at the fundamentals. When you get to your OTU, you get better at flying that aircraft. It never gets easier. As a professional in the military, it doesn't matter your occupation. It always gets, you're going to do more and more things that are harder and harder, but you just get better at it, and your toolbox grows, and you're able to easier adapt to those new challenges. So that's something to think about as well. If you're motivated by that, if you like the idea of service, then absolutely do it. But try it on for size first. Go out, rent an aircraft, take an introductory flight with somebody. If you're young and interested in the cadets, go fly with your cadets. Drill with them, take some of the other courses, see the things that inflame your passions and bring you joy, and chase those things.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Okay, Dan, that does it for part 2 of our chat here. I just want to thank you so much for your time. I know you are a very busy guy. Being the wing commander, it's not easy to put aside some time sometimes. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to come here and chat with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian, for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, that wraps up our chat with Colonel Dan Coutts, current wing commander of 15 Wing Moose Jaw. For our next episode, we'll be doing a special Valentine's Day episode where we'll sit down with Paul and Michaela Goddard. Listeners will remember Paul Goddard from our episode on the Cormorant. Paul and Michaela will be talking about their time as a service couple, as Paul is a pilot and Michaela is a former AXO or navigator. Do you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard on the show? Would you or someone you know make a great guest on the show, or do you have a great idea for a show? You can reach out to us at thepilotprojectpodcast@gmail.com or on all social media at @podpilotproject. As always, we'd like to thank you for tuning in today and ask for your help with the big 3. That's like and follow us on social media, share with your friends, and follow and rate us 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Keep the blue side up. See ya!
Engineer, shut down all 4.
Shutting down all 4 engines.